welcome back, Toby, to Beyond the Best, our podcast which looks at how to use innovation to be even better than the best in the business. Welcome back. Hope you're feeling well today.
Yep, very good. Looking forward to recording episode 3 on this.
Great.
It'll be good.
Okay, well, why don't we then get into it? Tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so I thought today we'd have a little discussion about brand reinvention. It's a bit of a nebulous concept, but effectively what I want to talk about a bit is how you can completely redefine who you are and what you're doing as a business, and basically appeal to effectively an entirely new customer base. So this ability to be a bit disruptive and think about actually what's gone before might be whatever we are. We might have a long tradition as a business, but how do we change that around and come at something completely differently, and effectively prioritize vision over tradition as a business and think about where do we want to be rather than where have we been as a business. So I think that's why. But I guess from your perspective, what does it mean and why is this important to insurance companies?
So it's a really good question, actually. We get asked it a lot, or maybe we don't get asked it a lot. Maybe we don't get asked it a lot, but we talk about it a lot in terms of, the importance of legacy and the importance of having a kind of strong foundation to build upon. You'll know we work with very large insurance companies that have been around for dozens or sometimes hundreds of years, it feels like. And it's a tough thing to say, we've had this legacy that's gone before and we just need to reinvent ourselves. In my opinion, there is a real danger at just relying on legacy to stay strong. Any time that you're involved in any sort of innovation workshop or why innovation is important, they'll pull out these kind of tomes around Kodak really should have seen things coming before they went bust. Similar with Blockbuster. These were companies that had very strong legacy and relied on their legacy to get them through very big shifts in societal trends and the way that people live in their lives. And I would say the same to insurance companies, which is, you rely on legacy only at your peril because people don't value that legacy if values in society change or if the way that society's living is changing. So that would certainly be my main piece of advice, I think. So the stats I've got on this, and I'm just going to look at my notes down here. So 1965, companies remained on the S&P 500 for an average of 33 years. So, 60 odd years ago, there was a long tenure. 1990, the average had dropped to just 20 years. And in 2026, projections indicate the average tenure will shrink to just 14 years. So, I guess what those statistics show you is that over time, actually, the average length of time that a business is able to stay competitive and remain competitive is shrinking. And that indicates actually legacy is less important because companies with longer legacies are actually dropping off that list, and companies with, much shorter and much younger tenures are kind of, becoming more successful. The other thing that's really interesting here is that when we've looked at how old insurance companies are on average, the average age of an insurance company is about 80 years old. So I think, that's really relevant, actually, that, lots of insurance companies that are hitting big are old companies. But what we're seeing in the market is actually that the most successful companies are becoming much younger. Yeah.
And I think that's really important from the point of big companies obviously want to stick around. They want to change. So I guess what we're trying to explore and discuss is, are there ways that big companies can start to think about how they change what they look like, reinvent themselves so that stat isn't so directly meaningful to them because they're actually being disruptive against themselves.
Yeah.
So if we were to think about one company that was good at doing this, is there an example that springs to mind for you?
Well, so there are lots of companies that do really, do this really well in terms of, constant reinvention. But there has been a company in the media over the past few months that are actually going through a very active reinvention, and that is Jaguar. And that's who we're going to talk about today, the car manufacturer Jaguar. So maybe we should start off with a little bit about who Jaguar are for those uninitiated. They're a vehicle manufacturer. They are part of Jaguar Land Rover, so they're part of a very large vehicle conglomerate. But they really came to prominence back in the 1960s, particularly in Britain, with some of these really celebrated vehicles. The E-Type, my personal favourite car, an absolute thing of beauty. That's. I haven't said that just for the podcast, by the way. It genuinely is my favourite car, and I think they've got this legacy that when people think of kind of British sports luxury, there's Jaguar. However, in recent years, that's not been enough for them. The legacy of having a great sporting heritage has meant that actually they've seen sales dwindle because they've not really understood and focused on what consumers of today want, and they've lent maybe too heavily on that legacy. So what we've seen this very distinguished and very established British brand do over the past few months.
It's a couple of months, isn't it?
It's the past, like
November, August time.
The past couple of months, we've started to see them have a very deliberate move in a very different direction. And I guess before we go into this and we start talking, because the podcast is called Beyond the Best, we understand that the Jaguar rebrand will not be to everybody's taste. Whether it's to my or your taste, I think we'll leave out of the conversation. But what we are saying here is this is an example of a company who have got a very strong legacy, very strong brand, that are actually making a very deliberate decision to not completely, rebrand. They're not changing their name, but to completely throw away some of that legacy to pursue a completely new direction. I think some of the things that they've done. They've unveiled this new logo. There's the kind of the new look and feel of the colours, the imagery, even some of the things like the logo type itself has come under scrutiny for having upper and lowercase letters. These are things that they think that will appeal to a very specific type of consumer. They're seeing who's doing well in the automotive industry at the moment. They're seeing the likes of Tesla and BYU kind of come out and say that we're here for the new generation. Jaguar are trying to do that as well. They're trying to very clearly pursue a brand new type of customer and not necessarily those that are tied into their legacy.
And it's interesting because you pull out some of the things they've done and their kind of, I guess, their campaign to launch this. And I remember, I think it was November when they launched their first advert. They're a car maker, as you say. That's what everyone knows them for. But their advert had no car in.
Yeah.
They're thinking much more broadly, holistically about brands. It's a trend. F1 have recently done the same. They've come out and said they're an entertainment company. Yeah. They're not a sport or a motor company. They are there about entertaining people, so they're competing with cinemas, with restaurants, with all those things. So I guess Jaguar are taking that step back in a similar way and saying, what are we doing for customers, and what's that, to your point, experience that we're trying to give?
It's totally right, and I think I can't remember where I read this, but certainly thinking about the way that Jaguar have gone is they see themselves as a luxury brand along the same lines as Louis Vuitton or whoever those kind of clothing or accessory manufacturers are. They see themselves as part of that holistic world rather than we're competing with Toyota or whatever it is. This is a really interesting angle, I think, particularly for insurance companies. And when they're looking to rebrand, is what world do they see themselves as a part of? So are you a part of this legacy world where you just compete with other insurance companies? Or is it, particularly, if I'm thinking about things like health and life insurers, about wellness, about making people being able to live better lives? And as a result, who do you partner with, or which ecosystem are you part of? And, for me, this is super interesting. And I think, we've seen people that are from the establishment coming out and calling this, woke. The rebrand is a kind of thing that appeals to the liberal left or whatever it is. The outrage there's no car in the advert, but actually, this is taking some real bravery to think we're separating ourselves from legacy here and from the norm and from our competitors to do something really different.
Yeah, and I think ultimately time will tell in numbers and kind of, I guess, the financial reporting of whether this is going to work, because it's a long vision. They're not going to have a new car on the market till 26. But I guess numbers already are showing that, the first advert went viral on YouTube. They had 1.6 million views or something. It's hit the front page of every major newspaper, which is a rarity for a car brand. So I think what is interesting is when we start to think about this in a bit more detail about if we were going to go about building a product from an established brand and start to reinvent it, what are some of the things we kind of talk about? And I guess my first question that springs to mind from your point around customers and, is it woke, whatever term, how do you go about selecting your customer if you're going to do this and throw away a traditional customer you used to have?
So I think this is a really interesting question. And And I think it's a question that every business should be asking themselves all the time. So at 90, we're no strangers to this. And I think over the past couple of years, particularly post-COVID, and also with the introduction of AI and a more competitive landscape, we've had to ask ourselves this, which is who are we asking? Who are we asking to buy our products and services? Who do we connect with? What are the things that we offer that meet a specific need with a specific type of customer in the market? I have lots of conversations, not just with you, Toby, but with my wife, who is sick of me talking to her. But one of the things I talked to her about the other week was Thornton's chocolate. Might sound like a really strange analogy that I'm bringing out a chocolate company, but they've seen a massive collapse in sales recently, Thornton's. So those of you that aren't in the UK, you might not have heard of Thornton's, but it's a brand that sells boxes of chocolates. They used to have a number of high street outlets that they've closed. They also sell through supermarkets. And they've picked this kind of mass market middle where they don't necessarily appeal to the high-end customer. So they're not going after the Hotel Chocolat, the very top-end Godiva customers. And they're not really going after the Cadbury's Galaxy market either. They're in the middle, and they're stuck in this place where they don't necessarily appeal to anyone. There are very few people that actually find this brand appealing versus the other two extremes. And I think that little analogy there just tells me a little bit about the importance of really understanding who your customers are. Because I think if you take the likes of Hotel Chocolat, who again another UK brand, but they really understand they've got a very discerning client base. Their branding and the way they message what they're selling will really appeal to a very specific person. So, for me, it's an absolutely essential part of any business trading successfully is truly understanding who your very specific customer is. The more specific you can get on what it is that they want and need, the more successful you're likely to be. And I think bringing it back to Jaguar, the outrage of 90% of people about the way they've rebranded this business, Jaguar is saying we don't care about it, because they've got this very specific customer in mind. Whether that actually plays out to be true, we'll see.
Yeah.
But I think what they have done is say, look, this is who our customer is. This is what they're going to love. This is the way we message to them. And the other 90% of people, similar to, I'm going to bring Hotel Chocolat back again, they're not appealing to people that are going to be out there buying boxes of chocolates in supermarkets. They're very exclusive. They know exactly who their customers are. And I think that's what we're seeing from Jaguar, and probably the piece of advice we would give here.
Yeah. And then once you've kind of, I guess, selected it and used the right framework to think about customers, frame them, it's all about thinking about the value proposition. Isn't it? Like, how do you serve that customer in that space?
Absolutely.
I think it's an interesting topic as to how you go through it. And would you say there's any tools or frameworks to help you select a customer?
We use a number of different things to do this. I think the first place to start off is the customer persona. So there's a canvas or a tool on our website that you can download for free that allows you to do that. And it's pretty simplistic, but it just allows you to truly visualize what a real customer's like. Because I think you can be there's danger of generalizing here if you're not specific. You can get to the point where you're saying, our customer is a man aged 35 to 45. Yeah, well, every one of those customers have got very different needs. There's that old thing, and Emily says it, for those of you that have encountered Emily, you might have heard her say this before, but I think it's Ozzy Osbourne and the King in the UK. They're the same age, they've got the same number of children, they were both born within 50 miles of each other. Very different people, Toby, very different people. And I think the ability to use something like the customer persona canvas that we use just allows you to kind of flesh out what are the real things that customer values, how do they really interact with the world.
Yeah, I think that's such a nice point. How do they interact? It's about the world rather than the product.
So I guess thinking about this in a bit of detail, maybe I've got a couple of questions to ask you, Toby, because I know I've been talking for a long time now, but how do you ensure that you're differentiated as a brand? What would be your advice?
So I think it's an interesting one, because if you get into jobs to be done theory and you become as nerdy about it as we sometimes can be, it's about thinking.
You can be, not me.
Okay, all right. Put it squarely on me. I think there's a number of ways you can go about thinking about brands, and it doesn't always have to start from what do we want to be. I think you need to think about the context and who else is in the market and what they're offering. And I think you want to start from there. You want to look outside, start to break down, if you're going after this customer in this space, what are other people doing to try and solve that? And where are they breaking down? So you can look at things and say, they're not doing this well, they're not doing that well, and start to pull those things out and say, as a brand, this is our differentiator. We've compared what we can offer, what everyone else has offer, and in these two areas, this is our point, and this is how we're going to differentiate it. And it's being very calculated about saying, for example, Aston Martin for Jaguar, that's the space they go into luxury cars. They are not doing electric cars very well.
Yeah.
So if we're going to appeal to this customer in this market, we're going to do it. We're going to charge them the same. We're going to give them the same quality in the car, but we're going to do it electric. So it's about being very definitive and comparing back from them to think about, can we position ourselves as unique against the market rather than thinking, actually, how do we just build the best product from scratch?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's that focus on pure uniqueness. It's like you say, it's not about, and again, coming back to Jaguar's strapline, which is copy nothing. Not quite sure I totally agree with that. I think there are opportunities to take inspiration from other places, and I guess, Toby, I'll come on maybe to ask you a little bit of a follow-up question to that, which is similar to the question you asked me. If somebody were to ask you how to do that, what would be your kind of route into that?
So I think I can be quite structured about this. I can start to think about effectively what I'd start to do is break down the value proposition for each of the brands. So you've obviously got to think about, if you're going into the space, let's say, who are the 5-6 big competitors. You can go bigger if you've got time. Bigger is better. And basically start to articulate very simply kind of the problem solution value of the customer. So what problem are they solving? Who is the customer? Make sure you're talking about the same customers. And value, how do you very succinctly say what value you find to customers? And I think within that, you kind of want the 3 key features that they're offering, so that it starts to go, this isn't just one sentence, it's a bit about, you're offering me these 3 very particular things and you're doing that well as a brand. And then basically almost kind of looking at, take all of those, put them on posters if you want, and put them all out so you can say, these are all the key features of our competitors. Which ones are missing? Which ones are not there?
I the thing I really like about that particular framework, so problem solution value is something that we talk about a lot in 90. Those of you that have been involved in pitching or pitch training with me in particular, you'll hear me banging on about PSV or problem solution value quite a lot. It's a really neat way of thinking about the way to present a value proposition. If we were pitching or we're training people to pitch, we say problem solution value is a nice way to do it. That's just as applicable, like you say, for big brands. So it's not something that appeals just to startups or whatever it is. Truly understanding that problem solution value piece is really important. So yeah.
And I think you come on to a nice point there when you start to talk about pitching. And I guess this is the kind of final element I wanted to draw into, thinking about Jaguar, but thinking about this generally. How important is messaging when it comes to redefining who you are as a brand or innovation? As in, if you've got a great idea, does it matter how you talk about it?
So this is a really tough question, but I think the way I would think about this is there are probably lots of amazing inventions out there that haven't got off the ground because they're not messaging the right way to their target consumer. So you and I have talked about this previously, and we talked about Apple as a company, and in particular the iPod. They were competing against a number of other different companies that were all also offering MP3 players or kind of mobile music devices. The thing that Apple got really right was their messaging. The customers that were buying from Apple, the product and the way that it was marketed just resonated. There was just that perfect blend. And I think, if we're being honest, was their technology any better than what Microsoft were offering with the Zune? Probably not. But actually, the thing that they got right was the ability to totally communicate their value proposition, in a really effective way to their customer base. So I think, in answer to your question, I think what we can say is messaging is not everything. You need to have the right product, but ultimately, if you're not able to get that product to meet directly with what a customer's thinking and feeling and what they need, you're less likely to be successful.
And I think it stands beyond that. I'd argue in terms of you've got to be able to communicate internally. You've got to be able to talk to colleagues. Sit here. If I was trying to sell you on something that we wanted to do differently, I'd have to go, how do I get you on board with it? What points do I pull out? How do I tell the story so that you can, I guess, get your hands around it and kind of be part of it? Because if you can't communicate it, you can't get people on the journey. If you can't get people on the journey, you can't do things together. And if you don't do things together, it'll go nowhere.
You're absolutely right. You're totally right.
Yeah.
So, I think, like you said, the jury's still out on this in terms of whether or not Jaguar have done an amazing thing or whether they've crashed the company. But I think you've got to applaud their bravery in trying to really go after something different and be super specific, not completely forget, but maybe take legacy off the table for a minute and think about what is it that our customers are really going to want. So should we, I guess we can wrap up a bit here, Toby. I don't know if you want to, from what we've talked about, maybe some of the things that we've learned, what would be your key takeaways here from what we've discussed?
So I think reflecting on the conversation we had just now and thinking about if I was going to tell an insurance company how to start thinking about reinventing themselves, what would I suggest they do? And the first point, I think, is know your customer. Like, really get to know them and think about who your customer is and why you're going after them. I think that's really important. The second thing I'd say that you really need to do is be decisive. Jaguar have done that. And whether they're successful or not will be down to whether they've been decisive in the right place, as in have they made the right decision, or should they have, in fact, gone for a different customer. But what they have done and they needed to do was be decisive and say, we are going after X and we're going to follow through with it. Their whole campaign has hinged together beautifully and has had this consistency because there's been that vision throughout the whole thing. So I think my advice would be on kind of the two things to take away is firstly, know your customer, and secondly, be decisive about where you're going to go with that.
Okay. Interesting. So I think I'd probably have a couple of extras as well. I think the first one for me is don't be encumbered by your legacy. Insurance companies are often in a really good position that they've built up these businesses over the past 100 years. Like we said, 80 years on average is how long an insurance company has existed for. Many of the ones that we engage with have been around for a lot longer. But don't wear that as this giant heavy coat that stops you from moving and reacting to things. There's often a fear of we can't throw away all the great stuff we've done. You don't have to throw away all the great stuff you've done. Just don't let it be something that holds you back. Really think about what your customers need and want and how their lives are changing. Because I think some of the examples that we've given about companies that haven't necessarily changed and have been over encumbered by legacy are the ones that we're now telling cautionary tales about. And then I think the other thing that's really worth me touching on is the ability to react quickly. Our strap line at 90 is getting things done in 90 days. We don't do that because it sounds catchy or because it sounds fun. It's because we understand that sometimes speed is of the essence. And particularly when you see that change, or if there is a big change in society, you should be able to make some decisions and make those changes quickly. I know when we were talking about some of our planning for the podcast, we talked a little bit about COVID and about some of the things that happened during COVID to make people, to make their lives a little bit better. So insurance companies were very quickly able to say, do you know what, if you work from home, we'll change your home insurance to be able to provide you with extra cover without having to buy a new policy. It's something that was very quick, but it actually made a difference in people's lives. And I would say the same is true here, that, the quicker you're able to change and react to some of those big shifts in society, the better.
Yeah. No, I think that's really nice to kind of end on that point of being able to react quickly. But I think that's everything we've had for today. I
think that's it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching this back in sort of 4 or 5 years' time when Jaguar have either taken over the world or crashed and burned spectacularly and saying I was totally wrong about what I was saying, or maybe I was right about what I was saying, Toby, and maybe you were as well.
Knowing you, it's probably wrong.
It's probably wrong. Yeah, it's probably wrong. But no, I really enjoyed that, and looking forward to the next one. So thanks again, Toby. Thanks for everybody for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.